So now we're going to delve even further into item classification by using an industry vertical, in this particular instance for telecommunications equipment. So to reiterate, we're talking about item classification. Does it have an ECCN? If so, what is it? What are its requirements, etc.? That's what we're talking about here. So what do we have? A US maker of telecommunications equipment has developed a new system that is designed to operate under extreme temperature conditions. Specifically, the system is configured to operate outside the temperature range of minus 55 degrees Celsius to 124 degrees Celsius. So some pretty extreme conditions. A customer in Iceland, pretty chilly up there I would imagine, has reviewed the system and wants to make a purchase. Moving on, the system is considered to be an end item. It's a system, a telecom system, that is intended for civilian use only, but the exporter's director of compliance believes that the system may require an export license or license exception. Maybe it has a dual use there, this theme of dual use items coming to life in a real world situation. So how does this director of compliance proceed? Let's see. As our item classification exercise for telecom equipment unfolds, our first step, starting to become a little redundant, determine that the item is subject to the EAR. As we noted previously, we're assuming that these exercises are indeed subject to the EAR, so we can move on quickly. Step 2, use a general description of the item to find possible entries in the CCL index. That's the alphabetical index that we've looked at a couple of times now, and we'll see again in just 1 second. But we definitely want to know, sub-bullet point on step 2, the product category and product group that the item falls under. 5, for example, and A. Product category expressed as a number, product group as an uppercase letter. In step 3, if an entry is indeed found, an ECCN number, reference the CCL, the Commerce Control List, proceeding from general characteristics to the most specific characteristics to ascertain the full ECCN entry. Now, you'll recall this list from a previous slide, falls under the BIS website, Export Administration Regulation Downloadable Files. These are the categories that we had explained previously. Category 0, nuclear materials, facilities, and equipment. Category 1, materials, chemicals, microorganisms, and toxins, materials processing, and down the list. We're interested in Category 5 because, of course, we're dealing with telecommunications equipment. So if you were on the BIS site and clicked on this link, Category 5, it would take you to the CCL that deals with telecommunications, Category 5. Let's move on to step 4. As we see in our first bullet point, step 4 involves using a specific description of the item along with precise technical specifications to determine if the ECCN applies. As a trade tip, and we mentioned this briefly but want to reiterate, we want to engage colleagues with deep technical knowledge of the item or items to determine the proper classifications. ECCNs are very much about technical parameters of a given item. So if we're a layperson, and oftentimes logistics people or trade compliance people are non-technical types, you have to engage colleagues that have a specific and deep knowledge of the technical parameters of the item in question. That's a good trade tip to use. In step 5, if the description and technical parameters fall under an ECCN, determine what licensing requirements exist. And then, although we won't talk about it much now, we want to go a further step and make a determination if the general prohibitions apply. More on that later on. So let's continue with our item classification exercise for telecom equipment. We're looking at the Commerce Control List Index, as we've seen a couple of times now. We're just in the T's on the index because, naturally, we're dealing with telecom equipment. This is a good place to start or to begin the classification process, using a general description and then moving into more specific. Well, as you'll note in our red highlight here, there's nothing more general as it relates to telecom equipment than the title Telecommunications Equipment, which, moving to the right, has an ECCN citation, as it's called, of 5A001. So we're onto something here. There's an ECCN citation for telecommunications equipment. But again, this is a very broad subject, so we have to go and look. Let's do just that. We mentioned a moment ago, when we showed the BIS landing page of the categories, that if we clicked on Category 5, it would take us right there to Category 5. You do that, and this is what's going to appear. So we want to be able to read through the various information, the notes and such. We won't go into too much detail on that. We're most interested in 5A001, or right above that, where it describes end items, equipment, accessories, attachments, parts, components, and systems. So we know we're in the right place. Telecommunication systems was the description of the product. Now, we're looking to classify the item, determine where, most specifically, the ECCN citation falls. But before we do that, once again, trying to get us used to how to navigate the nomenclature of the Commerce Control List, right below our red circle, you'll notice license requirements and those reasons for control. This becomes super important when we make a determination if a license is required based on the country that we're exporting to. Remember, we're not determining if a license is required right now. We are classifying the product. We'll come back to how to make a determination if a license is required as we move forward. But for now, we do want to point out the reasons for control, because that's the tie-in as it relates to the country chart. In this particular instance, the reasons for control are national security, surreptitious listening, and anti-terror. That will come up again later, so make a mental note of that when we go through the country chart. Now, as we move to the right, we start to see some more details. But as we note to the far right, for this item, we know we're in the right area because the category is 5 and the product group is A, which describes telecom systems, equipment, etc. So from there, we can move on. Some further detail on reasons for control. You'll note, for example, NS applies to 5A001.A and some others. National security applies to 5A001.B. Surreptitious listening goes on for a rather substantial listing there. But for now, as we stated, we're classifying the product. So we'll come back to that later on. Let's move on and see some further detail as it relates to classification. Now, before we get into the list of items controlled that you see here, we do want to make reference to a subject we'll be covering further along in this section, and that is license exceptions, or what is sometimes referred to as list-based license exceptions. Hard to describe what they mean and their application specifically, but every citation, well, not every citation, but most citations will have license exceptions that we can use to ship an item to a specific country for a specific end use to a specific end user by utilizing the license exceptions that appear in the ECCN citation. So here, and again, we'll be explaining these later on, so we don't have to go into too much detail now, but it's important that we bring them up. As it relates to this specific ECCN citation, there's an exception for LVS. That stands for limited value shipment below a certain threshold. GBS stands for Group B shipments. Those are countries, specific countries that have lesser controls. And CIV stands for civilian use. We'll come back to those later on. For now, we're looking at the list of items controlled, and we have to read through each passage to make a determination if the parameters of our product or the description of our product fall there. So we can run through some of them. For example, the first one, A, any type of telecommunications equipment having any of the following characteristics, functions, or features. And then it goes to A.1, specially designed, reference there. A.2, specially hardened to withstand gamma, neutron, or ion radiation, or, and this is the specific product description that we saw when we first introduced this example, specially designed to operate outside the temperature range from minus 55 degrees Celsius to 124 degrees Celsius. So there it is. So we know through the product description, through the technical understanding of our item, that we show up here. So we are indeed shown as an ECCN citation, and as you'll note on the right-hand side, based on the description and technological capabilities of the system, this item is classified as 5A001.A.3. So we went from the very general to the very specific to classify. Now, if we were to determine if an export license is required, we would have to go to the country chart, find the specific country or countries that we wish to export to, look up the reasons for control, and if there's an X in the box, then there's a license requirement. Might we be able to use a license exception? Perhaps. It depends on the given scenario. But that's the tie-in between the CCL and the country chart. But again, right now, we're only classifying the product. We are not determining if a license is required. We need the country chart to do that. We will continue this example further down the road after we talk about the next subject we'll be hitting, which is the general prohibitions. So we're going to stop this section here and then pick back up on the general prohibitions. We'll see you soon.